speaking from experience, a lot of people don't often declare that they are maybe neurodiverse or have a learning disability. I've seen it before. We've done loads of surveys and people have come back and said, nothing, no feedback. And actually, we know that's not true. I myself have often given that same answer. And I guess just to set the scene on that is reason being is for fear for being judged or people maybe treating me differently. So these things are not openly available. This data and information isn't openly available. So sometimes it can be really hard for L&D to put the right things in place. But there are things that we can do as a bare minimum, sort of basics. I might get dragged for this, but I think we all have a bit of unconscious bias in us. And that comes from, upbringing, our lives, the people we're surrounded by, our parents, our environment. We all have this kind of perception of people in this world. So when we go into the work environment, we have to start to unlearn and unpick those things and almost refresh.
Hello, and welcome to the Plumm Pod, where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR. On today's episode, I'm joined by Rihanna Lindsay-Smith, and she shares such valuable insights into accessible learning strategies based on her experience as a national and global L&D expert. Rihanna, hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited because this is our first time talking about today's topic. And before I give away too many spoilers, I really want to set the scene for our listeners to get to know more about you. So there's a question I like to ask every single guest. And that question is, was HR part of the plan or did this happen by chance?
This is a great question. And I think I'm just going to set the scene for L&D in general, because I think a lot of people don't plan to be in L&D. We often come through and land these jobs from different areas of the business because there's no formal qualification for L&D technically. You would do normally a HR degree. And so for me, I was actually studying architecture at university. And my first kind of corporate-y job was at an ed tech company, and I landed a sort of implementation/training role, very entry level. But I absolutely loved it. And I was working with sort of teachers and different kind of educational functions to kind of train educational software. And I was there for about 4 years, which is like my longest job that I had up until that point. And I also at university also unlocked that I am dyslexic. So that sparked a lot of things for me. So I kind of tied the two together. I done a lot of research into how people learn after my diagnosis and really kind of looked at how people learn, as well as being in that environment of training and teaching people to learn a particular product as well. And towards the end of the 4 years, I moved into a senior role in sort of training, and I looked about what I would do next. Didn't have much knowledge or understanding of HR or anything like that, but landed on L&D as kind of the closest thing to training. And so towards my end of that time at that job, I then studied the CIPD level 5, and that unlocked so many doors for me. And I guess started to move into kind of partnering roles, L&D partnering roles, then moving on to kind of a global training lead. And I guess the rest is history, but essentially just kind of moving through the ranks in L&D positions.
Amazing. I also love that you went from training to then into L&D. Let's set the tone a little bit. What is the difference between training and L&D? There's a lot of titles going on at the moment, but what's the main difference?
Yeah, so training is really kind of like, from my understanding anyway, sort of targeted approach to someone learning a particular skill or building knowledge, for example, whereas L&D is more focused on the long term. So building out skills over long term and building on them, potentially changing behaviour. And it's something that you want to make sure that is being applied over a long period of time constantly and is embedded into the culture of what you're doing day to day and the work environment.
I also really love that it's more of a proactive approach, exactly what you've just said. On today's episode, we're going to focus on learning and development and being inclusive with our learning, particularly from your diagnosis. Conversations that we've had is all around really being inclusive and how we can get the most out of our people, but set them up for success during the learning styles. So how can we, as learning and development L&D teams, how can we start to introduce more inclusive programs?
Yeah, I think this is a real challenge for people in L&D because speaking from experience, a lot of people don't often declare that they are maybe neurodiverse or have a learning disability. I've seen it before. We've done loads of surveys and people have come back and said, nothing, no feedback. And actually, we know that's not true. I myself have often given that same answer. And I guess just to set the scene on that is reason being is for fear for being judged or people maybe treating me differently. So these things are not openly available. This data and information isn't openly available. So sometimes it can be really hard for L&D to put the right things in place. But there are things that we can do as a bare minimum, sort of basic. So that could be in the training format itself. So making sure that we are including mixed media. So we're having a bit of text that is, various colors. We're having images, we're having audio, we're having video, even down to kind of how we're delivering it. So having instructor-led training, and then we're also having an e-learning version. Making sure that it's accessible as well. So if we are delivering a webinar, making sure we have closed captions on there, or something I really like to do is make sure I get the transcript and then provide a little summary of the webinar, because personally, I find it really, really hard to sit through quite long pieces of content. And it really benefits me to just kind of be able to see an overview of what it is. So we just ran a training program in my current company, and we're doing something called industry spotlight sessions. So it's just giving people insight to the industry. But the webinars are about 45 minutes for an hour long, so really intense to me, in my personal opinion. And we use Teams to deliver this. So what I did is I put the transcript on, take the transcript off, and then I summarized it and uploaded it so that people could just go, what are the key points? What are the key takeaways from this? So that makes it really, really accessible for people who struggle to engage in sitting in long pieces of content like webinars.
You've just given loads of great examples of accessible learning practices. If I'm in the shoes of an L&D professional, how do I start to choose where to start when no one's giving me any feedback? So there's so many strategies that we can do,
Mm-hmm.
but how could I start with knowing, okay, potentially I need to think about like the different media styles?
Mm-hmm.
How could I start to prioritize and know which one?
I think if you don't have the data, you need to go back to the original questions of why you're doing the training program, and what you're trying to achieve. And I guess that will help to inform you on the type of program you build and the format that you set it out in. So, and also who the target audience is and what their job is. So, for example, I'm currently working a lot with the commercial team. They can be very time poor. Um, they've kind of, I probably should say, it's like kind of got this ego, like I know what I'm doing, very kind of big personality. So you have to think about ways of which we're going to engage this group. And so in this context, we looked at the why. So we wanted people to gain knowledge, and we wanted to change behavior, and we wanted them to apply that behavior, I guess. And so we decided to deliver it in a workshop format, and that was the most appropriate for that group. So if you don't have the data, just go back to the original questions of why are we doing this, and that should inform you on how you build your training program.
Such a valuable piece of advice. Do you find that also applies to the level of seniority for attendees at any of the training sessions?
So when we're dealing with people who are slightly senior, again, we always circle back to the question of why are we doing this? And we want to find the most efficient and prompt way to deliver information to them. And that may not be the same as what we might do for other cohorts across the business. So I am really kind of an advocate for personalized learning approaches, not just for the individual, but for kind of different job titles and job roles. So making sure that we're delivering content that can resonate with the role, with the person in the role that they're in.
And how can we start to track the effectiveness of the different strategies that we're implementing through L&D?
There's loads of different ways that we can track effectiveness. I'm a bit old school, so I go right back to kind of traditional methods like the Kirkpatrick evaluation model. That's my favourite because it just is really simple, a really fine approach of measuring impact and return on investment, which can be really hard to look at. But essentially, it's got those 4 levels. So level 1 is your reaction. And I'll just use a kind of recent program that I've used to give an example. So for reaction, we did post-session surveys to understand how people felt about the training, how it was received, how it landed. We then moved on to level 2, which is the learning, how that landed. And we put in some scenario-based assessments to understand if people were kind of applying the learning that we put in place. And we also did post-program surveys as well to understand how much people took on board. And then level 3 is that behaviour change as well. So those post surveys also help to inform, did people's learning help to change what they did in their day-to-day job? And then level 4 is return on investment, which in this case, it was too soon to apply. But that usually refers to kind of monetary value or like how have we got the kind of investment back from what we put in to that program.
Amazing. Love that. Such a good structure. And I think
Yeah,
that's
I like
quite an easy structure for us to be able to follow. It's not too complex, not too complicated. And more often than not, that's what we're striving for. But I think you need all 4 pieces.
Yeah, you do. And I like to keep things simple.
Yeah.
But I like it to be really clear and land on data that just tells a story. And I think those levels do so.
And what were some of the most common challenges that we face as L&D professionals to be inclusive?
I would say not having the data. It's really hard to be inclusive from a neurodiversity perspective when you don't have the data. I think it's hard to accommodate. So we just try our best to make sure that it's flexible. And also we can't do everything as well. So we have to do what we have within our resources. So sometimes I want to create a program and I want it to be in person, but actually someone might benefit from it being self-paced. So can we make it digital? And then we want to add those captions, and then we want to, like, there's so many things you could do, but you can't do everything. So you just have to kind of focus on what's going to have the most impact for majority of the learners that are attending. And that's,
And as people, we want to try and do as much as we can. We do. I feel that so deeply.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's knowing the limits of what we can do, but accommodating at the same time. L&D and HR as professions, sometimes we're seen in silo, unfortunately.
Yeah. Why is that?
I don't know. And I wish that we were much more progressive as partners rather than working in isolation. Do you have any ways from your experience, or let me rephrase that actually, do you have any examples with your experience of how the 2 departments have come together?
It's a good question. It doesn't, I haven't seen much of it, but I guess where I work now is really forming that sort of structure. I mean, we work really, really closely with like people partners. And the job that I'm moving into, I'll be doing a bit more partnering with people in the business to understand the needs and the kind of gaps across the business so that I can be proactive in putting things in place to support them. And, you know, companies are going through changes in this economy, etc. So L&D can be really crucial to supporting people through those challenges, you know, individually, but also as teams, leaders as well at the same time. So we have people partners in our business, and then we've got L&D partners, and then sort of lead or manager, which is where I sit. And I guess moving forward, the plan for us is that I would work closely with people partners, but also leaders in the business, and I guess circle around to make sure that we're all kind of filling the gaps in terms of talent development, but also support for people in their career, to managing people better across the business. So I think that's a really good way of working together, which what we're striving for.
Talking about people in their career, Do you ever touch on the recruitment process from an L&D perspective, or do you ever work with the talent teams?
The team does, yeah.
Yeah.
So the team I work with, we do. Probably could always do more, but I guess some best practices, what we focus on is making sure that the talent acquisition team are trying to be as inclusive as possible by
Mhm.
giving them unconscious bias training, um, making sure that their approach to everything is fair. Something that I haven't seen as often, but I think should be done more, is almost standardizing the recruitment process. And
Mhm.
that could look like having really consistent questions that you're asking people in interviews, potentially having scorecards so that everybody is able to go through that same process and have the same opportunity to present themselves on those questions. Even things like blind blind what do you call it? Blind interview, not blind interviews,
CV screening.
blind CV screening. So we're not seeing any personal information and we're not being biased and we're picking that out. So I think L&D can should and do in our function work really closely with the talent acquisition team to make sure that sort of DE&I is encompassed into our
Mhm.
recruitment process.
And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of hiring managers out there, because we all have our own lived experience, haven't received unconscious bias training.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most fundamental pieces of training
Yeah.
that we should be having. What sort of feedback do you get from your attendees once they've had that training?
Eye-opening.
Yes. Love that.
Um, it can be thought-provoking. Um, And I might get dragged for this, but I think we all have a bit of unconscious bias in us.
I
And that
agree.
comes from, upbringing, our lives, the people we're surrounded by, our parents, our environment. We all have this kind of perception of people in this world. So when we go into the work environment, we have to start to unlearn and unpick those things and
Mhm.
almost refresh to think clearly and make better decisions. So unconscious bias training really helps to start that process, but it isn't the only part that we should be doing. It should be continuous. I think unconscious bias training is not mandatory. It's not one of those mandatory courses. So some companies don't even do it, which is
Yeah.
a bit of a concern, a bit of a red flag. But it is something that I think is key in making sure we're taking the right approach when it comes to recruitment and how people behave.
You
Yeah.
just said then around it being continuous and unconscious bias, not necessarily being a one and done session. Tell me a bit more what you mean when you say it should be more continuous. Are there any other sessions that you would really recommend from an L&D perspective?
I think so. When I say that, I think unconscious bias training needs to be done more regularly,
Yeah.
and it needs to be developmental as well. So it needs to be like you've got, 101, this is the basics. Let's just break the ice here. And then I think we need to kind of keep resurfacing it
Mhm.
through the year or annually. I mean, it could be annually, but, frequently, basically, it needs to be resurfaced so that because people forget, they go to a training session and it is training like we discussed earlier, and then they go off and then they forget. And then
Yeah.
those unconscious bias, they kind of creep back in and perceptions creep back in and experiences happen. So I think that it needs to be kind of regular, but
Mm.
also it needs to be upheld by structural change. It needs to be upheld by leadership. It needs to be upheld by policies and processes in place that support what we're trying to train here and show people.
Such a strong point. And I completely agree. The challenge with hiring is not every hiring manager is continuously hiring. So
Yeah.
when I've spoken to hiring managers in the past, they're like, yeah, I did that training a year ago, but I also haven't hired somebody for 6 months and life goes on, the day to day is taken over. And I can't remember. I agree. I think that needs to be built in as part of a manager enablement session,
Mhm.
a program where we're having that continuous development for our leaders. It's one of the most important things, especially when they're the first people that our candidates are experiencing of a company. And that's essentially where we're starting for our experience.
Yeah. And I think that's where L&D and talent acquisition come involved because
Yeah.
hiring managers, they've also got their day-to-day jobs. So they're not doing it regularly. But we are the experts. So as an L&D professional, I consider myself kind of an expert in this field. And same with talent acquisition. So it's for them to sit with hiring managers through this process, handhold them and guide them
Mm.
on the best practices and kind of recenter them into this is what we should be doing. This is the best practice and leading the way on that. I mean, throwing it on hiring managers to say that they should always remember it is just unrealistic, because it's just a small part of what they're doing every now and again, and not their day to day. Whereas for me and for talent acquisition, it is our day to day. So yeah, I think that's the role we play in that.
Isn't it such a shame that HR's relationship is not as close? And I don't know if potentially because in HR we have so many different pillars to our function, whereas talent is, of course, talent. And potentially there's such an area where we can start to work more like cross collaboratively for supporting line managers, especially with L&D. The world of work is changing. We're in remote teams, hybrid teams, office teams, multiple generations are in the workplace. And it's really important that and this is such a corporate term, but like our hands on the pulse, we know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're seeing that in terms of the L&D, but maybe we're still being really reactive from HR rather than being proactive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can be the case, and I don't know what the causes of that actually is. I do try my best to be as proactive as possible, but ultimately, um, business initiatives kind of lead us in what we focus on next, I guess, or business priorities. And sometimes what we think is a priority is not a priority to everybody. And so it's for us to kind of have to go and gather the evidence, do the research, and show that it's really important, and show that if we don't do it, that's a question I always ask, like, what if we don't? What will happen? So yeah.
And a really key thread that you've just said then is predominantly around the culture. If the company also has a learning culture, if they're open to it, because not every company is, and not every company has a learning culture. So how does leadership start to build a learning culture within an organization?
I think firstly, you need to lead by example. Like, building a learning culture needs to come from the top down. You'd be surprised how much people do like learning and want to learn. But when it feels like something is being forced on them and it's not being practiced at all areas and all levels, then people can be a bit more dismissive towards it. So I think for leaders need to lead by example. They need to create an environment that is like, psychological safety, if that probably is a good word to put it, like where people feel comfortable asking questions, where people are willing to take risks without worries of failure or being seen as like not doing their job well, or whatever, being judged. That's probably a better way to describe it. I think I heard a term that, I've worked in some kind of different environments, but I've heard a term before, like, if you do that, that's career suicide. And I was horrified to hear that, because I was like, career suicide? Like, we're in corporate, we're literally saving PDFs, we're just doing things that are not saving lives. Unless you're a doctor, unless you're like, doing something that actually saves a life, nothing is career suicide. So we need to create, leaders need to create a culture where people feel safe to ask questions and learn and be open to trying new things.
Couldn't agree more. It's definitely about the environment that we're curating. And I actually saw a statistic recently which said 92% of companies that have a strong learning culture are more likely to be innovative, which is such a strong commercial decision at the same time. But also we're really then creating an environment where the team can be innovative.
100%, yeah.
And the ripple effects for that within business, we then become market leaders because we are ahead of the curve. We're trying things, we're experimenting, we're learning and failing, evolving. But if we don't create that environment, we're stunting that opportunity.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that applies to learning and development.
Yeah, it does, yeah. And I think I'm lucky enough to say, because I've got quite a really supportive manager, and my manager is really supportive. And I often try to think outside of the box and try new things. And I often take it back to them and I say, what do you think of this? What about that? They're really, really open to me kind of applying that out there, and as long as I've got the evidence of some sort. But yeah, it is really key for us to be innovative and try new things.
And especially with your role in L&D, is your manager open to more innovative and agile approaches to L&D?
Yeah, she is actually. Yeah, I would say more so than I have experienced in the past, which is
Hmm.
a really, really nice place to be in, but also they're really forward thinking. Um, it's a new group, it's a new function for our team. So it's a kind of developing team. So we're quite a new team. So that allows us to be really flexible and try new things. So we're not stuck in old ways, or we're not stuck on kind of old practices that, people like to learn. We're quite a newly formed um, department within people and culture so that we're able to be a bit more flexible.
And how do you keep up with any new like L&D trends, and how do you keep yourself knowledgeable and skillful?
Well, social media is great for that.
Yeah.
I love, like TikTok. I was reluctant to get on TikTok for a long time, but now I'm starting to build a little bit of a profile and presence. But you can learn so much just on social media. We no longer have to like go to a whole event to
Hmm.
learn something now. You can access information at the tip of your fingertips. Um, you can join webinars for free. A lot of companies do webinars for free, so I like to kind of sit in on those. Yesterday I went to a networking event
Nice.
off which I found on LinkedIn. So there's loads of ways to kind of stay informed. Um, Obviously, CIPD has lots of information on there, but I try to kind of dip in and out of that. So like I will sit
Hmm.
into it, but try to kind of go to things that like companies offer, like especially startups, because they're really creative and they're really thought thinking. So they will often have like workshops on really specific areas that might interest me, and I try to kind
Nice.
of take the time to do so, because I really do think L&D are the last function to be invested in, and I think if it's on me and if I don't do it, then no one will. So yeah.
You've actually changed my perspective there, because I thought HR were the last people, but I actually think you're right. I think L&D
Yeah.
are the last, because you guys are providing the training and the resource and the learning and the knowledge. And who's providing that to you when you are L&D, right?
Yeah, all the time. Get it? It's such a struggle actually. But I do take a proactive approach because
Nice.
even as L&D professionals ourselves, we forget to invest in ourselves.
Hmm.
And if we need to kind of practice what we preach, really, right? We're telling people like we need to build a learning culture, we need to be continuously learning, you need to be asking questions and thinking about what you can do next. And we're not doing that for ourselves. We're so focused on other people. So I do try to take a proactive approach in making sure that I'm spending like an hour a day learning,
Hmm.
whether it's about L&D or just something in the business as well. Yeah.
I love that you just said learning about the business.
Mhm.
Sometimes we can be so focused on our role and the day to day, but the reality is we need to step out of our lane, learn about the wider world. It's no longer about, from an HR perspective, it's no longer about HR, it's about the world that we live in. And that's where we need to go beyond the expected and the traditional realm. Networking events, webinars, literally going for a coffee, somebody outside of your industry has opened my eyes to how I can be better
Mhm.
as a professional and with my practice. I don't know if you found events outside of the people and culture realm to be beneficial for your career.
Yes, they have. I think meeting people in different contexts who can
Mm.
tell you about their world is always going to be beneficial, right? Um, Everything should be a learning experience in that context. You can learn so much about different industries because I think even that can be a thing. Like some people like to stay in consistent industries, and meeting people in L&D that are on in different industries
Mm.
can also be really informative and make you think differently. I mean, I've stepped in a slightly different industry myself previously, so I worked in sort of healthcare, and it's
Mhm.
such a huge turn from like working in tech or
Really?
working where I work now. Yeah, very, very different approach to learning and development and the way people sort of engage with training programs over there. So
Do you think that's more the industry or the demographic of the team?
that's a good question.
Just trying to pinpoint on there, because
Mm.
it's thinking, what is it that's making it different? Because sometimes industries are very specific on their approach to L&D as well.
Mm. I do think it's the industry
Yeah.
because there are different priorities. So when I worked in sort of healthcare, there was much more emphasis on me making sure that for my region that compliance was done, and it was because obviously healthcare is really, really important that people are compliant. And then sort of like soft skills were coming second to that, and other kind of development areas were coming second to that. Whereas where I work now, it's really important to have those soft skills. We have like what we call power skills that we train constantly through the year. And that is it's kind of more of an opportunity to engage with that. It's more of a priority, I guess, um, amongst compliance. Like I came in and we did like compliance at the start of the year, and it's like, oh, that will come back around again. But it's not like prevalent, I guess.
Could you give me an example of the power skills, maybe top 3? I know you won't share all your secrets. I totally understand why. Top 3 power skills.
I'm not actually doing them, so I'm part of the team. So we've got present like a pro, which is all about presenting, putting your best foot forward. Feedback fundamentals, and then we've got an influencing session.
Ooh,
Yeah. So being, I guess, in media,
yes.
These kind of things are really quite important for teams like commercial, but everybody really, not just commercial. Like we're all kind of having to speak up a lot, go to events and showcase like what our offering is. So a lot of people will want to engage and learn those skills because it applies to their day-to-day quite a lot. So soft skills are quite important.
They absolutely are. Absolutely. Ooh, yeah, I really like those. Thank you. So unfortunately, I only have one more question. And the question is, looking back on your career, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
I would say just go for it. As I said to you earlier, this year is all about unlocking my true potential and putting my best foot forward. So I think just trying new things and going for it is my best advice. Don't worry about what people have to say. Get rid of that imposter syndrome. I think we all suffer from it, and that can sometimes hold us back from speaking up and putting ourselves forward. But I'm really focused on going for it and speaking up about what I want and saying what I want, and yeah, giving it my best shot. So that would be my advice.
And being proud whilst
And
you
being
do it.
proud. Yeah, exactly. Standing on it, standing on it.
What a message to end on. And I know a lot of people will relate to that. Completely agree. Be proud. And this is your year. I feel it. So thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Loved the conversation. And if anyone wants to find you, where can they find you?
Oh, they can find me on TikTok. Because
I love TikTok.
Under Rihanna Gallery.
Amazing.
And also Instagram, Rihanna Gallery as well. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you for having me.
Like this episode? Click here for more HR talk. And if you're just catching up, check out our previous episodes right here.